Thank you all for joining us. We are here at Makerere University Business School with a number of people who are ready to listen to this discussion. We are China-Uganda Research Network, and it is hosted in the Faculty of Management. So we promote Africa, China research, but particularly we are more interested in Uganda, China research. We would want to promote and also improve the well-being of Chinese and Ugandans as they go to any of these countries. So we are happy to host our discussants today. We also invite any other person who would want to join our research network to join us at Makerere University Business School, where we are hosted. So with those few words, Joel, I thank you for coordinating this. We thank also our discussants who are already online, who are ready to talk to us about today's topic. You're well welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you so much for that very warm welcome. Yes, friends. Good morning, good afternoon. I know it's morning for people in the US and Canada. Lema is joining from Montreal. Evening for us here in Australia, and perhaps afternoon for those in Uganda, the UK. So yeah, wherever you are, I hope you're doing well, and thank you for joining us today. It's a very timely and important discussion where we will be trying our best with the expertise and the experience of our guest to unpack the recent FOCAC and try to predict the future of China-Africa relations. So my name is Joel Odota, and I'm from Uganda, but I'm currently based in Canberra in Australia. I just finished my Master of International Relations from the Australian National University. So I'm still hanging around, haven't gone back home. Yeah. So, friends, the recent FOCAC held in Beijing from September 4th to 6th of this month has again, put on the spotlight the evolving relationship between China and Africa, of course, as usual. And this year's summit, which was themed "Joining Hands to Advance Modernization and Build a Community with a Shared Future," really took place at a very critical moment. As the China-Uganda Research Network, we think this is a critical moment because of so many reasons. Of course, the geopolitical shifts. We've seen what has been happening in Western Africa with the coups and the reorientation of African leaders, particularly these countries trying to look more towards China and Russia, and less towards the West, especially in their political engagements. But we are also seeing a growing impact of course, climate change. And COVID-19 is not yet gone. We are recovering from COVID-19. And of course, wars in Ukraine, in West Asia. So for us, we think really this is a very critical juncture in not just the China-Africa relations, but in global geopolitics. And being the first fully physical FOCAC since the pandemic, I think that expectations were really high for the outcomes of this FOCAC. And people have been watching this. Uganda, for instance, has been looking to China for a long time to finance a lot of its projects. although it wasn't successful in getting money to finance the standard gauge railway portion from Kenya's border to the capital in Kampala. But hopes are high that China would finance the East African crude oil pipeline, which a lot of Western countries have boycotted and refused to offer financial support or even insurance for it. So, and a lot of other countries, Nigeria is facing economic crisis. There have been protests in Kenya as well. So, and like we have been monitoring, the Nigerian president went to Beijing several days before, so he could have a side meeting prior to the FOCAC. So that, to our understanding, was hinting to the expectations that some of these African countries really have towards the FOCAC, and of course dates, which we'll talk more about later. So what did we hear from the FOCAC? We have seen over $50 billion of commitment from Beijing, which really shows that China has still again reaffirmed its support for Africa. So this 50 plus billion dollars is going to credit lines, other assistance, but also investment in the next 3 years. Anyways, our guests are going to shed more light onto this. So today we are really privileged to hear from an exceptional panel. Really, I call it exceptional because they are very prominent people in the China-Africa field, which in my opinion is a growing field and it's gaining attention today. So first is Dr. Lauren Johnston, who is an economist, and I'll just get the full bio in a minute. And we have Dr. Liang Chen, who is joining from Australia. Lauren, I understand, is in Melbourne in Australia as well. Liang is in Canberra, Australia, with myself, and Lema is joining from Montreal in Canada. So yeah, I'll just let you understand a little bit about the guest for today, and then I'll give them an opportunity to just say hello to you. So Dr. Lauren Johnston is a development economist with a lot of experience in this China-Africa relations field, but also she's done and she's still doing a lot of work in the field of demography and, broadly speaking, just the economy. So we are really privileged to have her. She currently serves as a consultant with the South African Institute for International Affairs, or SIAS, which is based in Johannesburg. She's also an associate professor at the China Studies Center, the University of Sydney. She's previously worked with a number of academic institutions, University of Melbourne, Beijing Foreign Studies University. She's also worked with the World Bank, but she's also been an ODI fellow in the Ministry of Development and Economic Planning of Sierra Leone. So these are just a few places. I don't want to go so much into profile. It's very long. I can spend an entire day reading it to you. So thanks, Professor, for taking the time to join us and share your experience. Now, Dr. Liang is a lecturer in the University of Botswana's Chinese Studies program, but he is currently at the Australian National University, particularly in the China in the World Center as a visiting fellow. Liang's research mostly focuses on China's growing political and economic influence in the global south. So he is actually an anthropologist and has been researching in recent years technology transfer between China and Ethiopia. He's done quite commendable work there. And he also looks at, Chinese diaspora in Botswana and, in exchange, African expatriate communities in China. So that's Dr. Liang Chen. Thanks so much again for your time and for accepting our invitation to share your thoughts on today's theme. And finally, we have my very good friend, Lema Rahim who is a PhD candidate at the University of Montreal and is a Vernier Scholar in Canada. I met Lema at the Yanqing Academy of Peking University in Beijing, where he completed his Master of China Studies. So Lema has actually done extensive research in both China and Africa, and his PhD dissertation looks at the conflict impacts of Chinese investments in hydro power dams in Ghana and in Sudan. So we are once again very much excited to have Lema and all of the other panelists. So I'll just give them a minute to say hello, and then we'll dive straight into our discussion for today. And I have just a couple of questions for them, and just get them to shed some light and give us some insights into those themes. And already we've been very careful in choosing our panelists. Lema is keen on security development nexus. Dr. Liang Chen is an anthropologist, and of course Dr. Lauren Johnston brings in the economics into this discussion. But all of them are very, very experienced people, established academics. So I'll start with Dr. Lauren Johnston. If you have a minute, please greet the audience, and if you wanted to add anything to what I've already said.
Thank you, Joel, and thanks everyone for listening. I don't have anything to add to your introduction. Thank you. It was very generous. And yeah, hi everyone. I'm going to jump right in, if you'll forgive me. I was reading through the kind of documents coming out of FOCAC and everything I've read since, and I came up with just like kind of 7-8 points that stood out to me about this year's FOCAC. So I'll just run through them. The first was the overall comprehensiveness of kind of China-Africa relations. If you just read through this thing, it kind of covers everything from like museums to military to climate change to meteorological cooperation. So that's just my first comment, was just a sort of, despite that I've been following these ties for almost 20 years, I was just like, wow, like it's so comprehensive. The second one was just the details. Like there was really a lot of details in this document. So anyone interested in China, Africa can find out so much just by actually reading what gets published. Third was Xi's 10 list of points in his plenary speech. And what stood out to me was that the first of the 10 was a governance. It was a political goal, which I kind of thought was a bit unusual somehow. I don't know why, but from my experience, I thought, wow, like his very first thing is a governance reform point or something, like macro, the institutional side. So that kind of just grabbed me, because normally it would be the money or the aid or the trade or something. And then a few more detailed, I guess the next macro point would be the phrase modernization. Just came up and up and up. So if there'd be like a key word in all these documents from this year that came up and up and up, to me it was modernization. And now a few more sort of detailed points. There was interesting stuff on kind of health and industry combination this year. I thought there was more emphasis on developing a pharmaceutical industry. So there's kind of years and years of health cooperation. China's been sending doctors to Africa since the 60s. And there's been a lot of health cooperation, but kind of buried deep in one of the documents this year is emphasis on the development of a pharmaceutical industry. And it wasn't in the industrialization clause. It wasn't even in the health clause. It was like buried somewhere under like people-to-people ties and SDGs. So it kind of stuck out to me because it's a big industry with big potential, but it was kind of hidden somewhere down in a people-to-people ties clause. So that's just one thing. I think there might be some big growth in pharmaceutical things because I just hadn't seen it it was kind of there but buried. And then from my lens as an economist, 3 final points stand out, which was in both Xi's speech and in the other documents, the action plan and so on. It's called let me get the name right. It's the Pioneering Zone for In-Depth China-Africa Trade and Economic Cooperation Zone, which is a zone in Changsha in Hunan province. And it's amazing. Like, if you're an economist, this is just where it's all happening. This is the most exciting zone in China-Africa policy making. So they have like a renminbi internationalization experimental zone. They have this overcoming digital hurdles for trade. They have an economists research cluster. They have all these actual trade passageways like air cargo, ocean and river, and normal kind of rail to ocean. It's like a zone that is intending to think about and overcome every possible obstacle in the way of elevated China-Africa trade, from foreign currency issues to language issues. Even they have like a training TVET, technical and vocational training hub, to make sure there's the staff for these projects. So that zone got a mention in several places, but it's really not well known. And I feel like it should be more known than it is, and even more so after this year's FOCAC, because it got these 2 mentions, or these 2 key mentions. And then feeding into that, I don't know if it actually happened at FOCAC or after FOCAC, but there was the launch of the first peer zone in Africa of the Hunan zone. So you've got that in-depth cooperation zone in Changsha, Hunan, and it now has a peer zone in Niamey, Niger, or it will have, like, it's agreed. That was all agreed in Beijing around FOCAC. So this amazing zone in Hunan now has a peer zone in Niger. And that zone in Niger is going to be working on using local currency in trade, using the renminbi in trade, overcoming all these trade hurdles. And it's kind of like the peer of the Hunan zone, but it's in Niger. And so to me, this is really fascinating, because I don't think anyone paid any attention to that announcement at all. But this tiny little unknown zone in what will be in Niamey might actually come to be something quite deterministic in China-Africa trade over the next 10 years. So that was and then my final point is something that maybe Liang Chen can tell us more about, which is also buried deep in, I think, the action plan, was the announcement of a China-Africa (Ethiopia) UNIDO, the UN Industrial Development Organization, cooperation zone. So there's going to be this China-Ethiopia Industrial Cooperation Zone with the help of the UN Industrial Development Organization, launched and developed in Ethiopia. And I don't know why Ethiopia was specifically chosen. I don't know what the plan is. And maybe Liang Chen, maybe you can tell us something about that. But I thought these zones, the one in Niger and the one in Ethiopia, no one is talking about them, but I feel like they might be a little window to where things are going at the margins, like the kind of interesting little changes. That's my comments. I hope that was interesting.
Well, thank you, Prof, for sharing with us your takeaways, and for also being very keen on these FOCAC documents, to be honest. And I've read one of your papers where you've developed what you call the Yunnan model. So is that what we are seeing now? Yunnan being sort of the center for China-Africa relations, and things will start to diffuse from Yunnan to go into Africa. Is that what we are talking about?
I mean, they'll keep diffusing from lots of different places. So there's obviously Guangdong, Beijing, all these other places. But what's happening in Hunan is interesting, because it's the kind of thought school. It's the planning zone. It's like the thinking hub of how to deepen and overcome all the obstacles. And the reason it's Hunan, I think, my theory is why it's Hunan, is because Hunan has the economic advantages in areas relevant to Africa. So it's a food bowl of China. It has really advanced agricultural kind of industry, and it has advanced construction and materials industry like Sunny and a few others. So it's got these kind of big construction companies. And then number three, it's home of China's electronic trains and BYD, the electronic car company. So in terms of promoting green and electronic transportation expansion in Africa for China and Africa, it's a perfect province. And then finally, it also has lots of sort of mining and other sort of heavy industry. So I think it's been chosen because it's sort of it's not one of China's richest provinces. It needs to develop itself. And not being one of China's richest provinces, it's kind of maybe ripe to partner with, a lot of African countries. And then it has all these industries that are super, super, super relevant. So the Hunan cluster, the zone in Hunan, it has like 5 industrial clusters where they're like promoting industries for cooperation. And it's something like mining and metallurgy, TVET training, construction, agriculture, and something else. But it's very, very specific. You can really tell the kind of industrial cooperation. But that's why I think the zone in Niamey, Niger, and the planned one in Ethiopia, I think they're so interesting because they might give a window to how all that's going to roll out at the Africa end. It's all very well to have this big thing in Hunan, but how's it going to be rolled out at the other end? And how will it work and be made to work in an Africa for Africa's interests? And I think maybe the zone in Ethiopia and Niger might give us some hint on that.
Yeah, thanks, Prof. And I'll actually come to to Dr. Liang Chen in a bit. But before I go to him, you just mentioned that this year's FOCAC has highlighted some really strange things, governance being one such thing. And if you read the documents, China is also big on training, and modernization, as you mentioned, is another keyword if you read this document. So I'm just keen to know from you, because it's always been the norm in the African continent that China is going to give them the big money to do the roads, the rails, the bridges. In Uganda, like I mentioned in my intro, for nearly 10 years, Uganda was engaging with Beijing to fund the portion of the standard gauge railway, and finally, China couldn't give the money. So how is this? So it looks like China is now for what it calls small and beautiful, right? Shao Arme. So it's now for the small and beautiful, but I don't know if this is the appetite on the African continent. What's happening with the infrastructure? The big money, the big projects, and looking at the huge infrastructure gap that we still have. For sure, the Yunnan model is good, and all of these small and beautiful projects could really have real impacts on the African continent. But I'm just keen to know how this is received on the African continent. Normally, that's where deals would be made. This rail, that road, this hydropower. But it seems like it's moving from mega investments to smaller projects. What's your comment?
Who's the comment? Who's the question to? To Liang Chen?
Still to you.
Oh, okay. I would call the small is beautiful agenda small is also beautiful. I don't think it means big isn't beautiful. And I don't think it means big projects are going away. I think it's intended to emphasize that there will also be some small is beautiful things. So while you're doing all these big projects, don't forget to do the small ones. So don't forget to build the schools, don't forget to plant the trees, don't forget to kind of, help the kids go get to see the doctor while you're in the process of building this expressway. Don't forget to make sure the village next to the expressway gets what they need. So I don't see it as big is now ugly. I see it as small is also beautiful. And don't forget that small is beautiful. So I don't in any way see it as diminishing the big. I see it as this is how we need to complement these other big things we're doing. Because if we don't, then the big ones might fail. Because you don't win the hearts and minds. So it's really, to me, it's big is still beautiful, and it's even more beautiful when you have the small things around it too.
Wow, interesting. I think I love this because a lot of the times we've thought that, oh, now time has come for African nations not to get any big projects from China. This is really the thinking, this is really the conventional wisdom. But yeah, I like it that there is going to be small plus big, happening at the same time.
Yeah, that's my take, which doesn't mean China will be throwing money at every big project. It needs to be sustainable, but there's no closure on the big projects. I mean, where there's a need for a big project and it's sustainable, I'm sure it'll go ahead.
Thank you, Prof, for all of this. And also the other aspect of this year's FOCAC is, like you said, there's the global aspect to things. There were the three Gs, what I just called, the three Gs. There's the GDI, the GSI, and the GCI. The GDI being Global Development Initiative, GSI, Global Security Initiative, I guess, and then GCI, Global Civilization Initiative. So this is really interesting. It's China trying to align things to the global agenda. Whether it's being African Union Agenda 2063 or the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and so this is really it could also hint on sustainability. So small is beautiful, but also big would still be invested in if necessary. Anyways, thanks for all of this, and we might still have time to get back to you. Why don't I get Dr. Liang Chen? There's a question from Dr. Lauren Johnston. Why Ethiopia? Ethiopia / probably Africa. Is Ethiopia the China's China-Africa cooperation hub? Where things would start in. Why Ethiopia exclusively mentioned? And put in this document. But also we understand Ethiopia is a member of the BRICS. Would that be a reason? I mean, just thinking as a lay person. Yeah. Did you want to add something, Professor?
Hello?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Joe, thank you for your generous introduction. I think that the Professor Lauren Johnston has outlined the big map of the FOCAC, and also you draw us the our attention to the shift to the small and beauty thing. Can I just address that the small and beauty thing first? So I'm an anthropologist. I'm not like international politics or just have the top down view of the entire China and African collaborations. But my take or my sense of this Xiaomi is that it might be that China has been facing the backslash of this when it implements this infrastructure or the industrialization of the African continent, because it involved a lot of the labor issues, or when you build a bridge, you can bypass the interest of the neighborhood, something like that. So I guess one of the concern is that why don't we just start from experiment with the small and beautiful things and just reach out to the take root to the grassroots or to the to the people and just like in Chinese words, would be like promote the image, change the recognitions of the African people towards this mega project like that. So I guess that's one of the concerns behind this shift. But with regard to whether this small and beauty project will divert the investment from the big and I don't know how to say that, but it could not be like the big and ugly project. I know, I think that you have to look at the specific countries. And so Professor just raised a question why there's the pioneer project between China and Ethiopia. I think from my from my viewpoint is that because the Ethiopia is politically is very important. It's a headquarter of the African unions, right? So everything, if you can start from like Ethiopia, you can just promote that just to other African countries. I'll give one example is that the construction of the African Union, that huge construction complex, and once it's done, so the company constructed this big structure, then just venture into the domestic construction market of Ethiopia very easily. Why? Because it is the buildings there, so everyone can see that. Not only the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, but also the Prime Minister of other African countries. They can say, okay, look, China has done something good. Why don't we just just introduce this Chinese company to other African countries? I think the demonstration effect. It's a one of the reason behind why the cooperations between start from China and Ethiopia, and also the reasons like industrializations is I guess Professor Lauren Johnston has more experience because he's all about the comparative advantages. And Ethiopia is unlike other African countries, is not very rich in the natural resources, or even though it has some natural resources, the deal is with some other Western countries. But what Ethiopia boasts is the like the human capital or the cheap labors. And on the China side, there's the strong motivation for this state-owned enterprises or the private enterprises to move overseas to to profit. So Ethiopian, and China it's I think it's a perfect marriage in terms of this industrialization. Yeah. So yeah, that's my reading of this the recent like the shift to Xiaomi or the initiative starting from China and Ethiopia. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Liang. And really, in the last FOCAC 8, in the people connection aspect of things, for instance, we could see China promised scholarships. I think over 50,000 scholarships in like the next 3 years. So when you read this year's FOCAC, it mentions training, but much of the training is train military personnel, police, young African military leaders, or set up some governance training, leadership training centers on the continent or political elites. So in terms of like from an anthropological standpoint, what do you think is the future of the people to people? I mean, an average African, let alone the political elites. So it looks like the training is going to high level training instead of, the scholarships that, African students used to. I'm not sure if I saw any mention of, this number of scholarships, but the figures were mostly pointing to, high level trainings. political parties, elites?
Yeah. I think that the trainings or the collaborations between, or you can put that as like a party-to-party collaborations. So for example, has been there for a long time. So I would reckon that I would take the FOCAC is kind of umbrella. It's like a menu to but what's on the menu is not new. It's just a recognition of the ongoing processes. So I hope to I would like to say that the training of the elites has been long time. Like dating back to the for example, I'm from Nanjing. There's the military academy who trained like presidents of 6 African countries like that. That dates back to the 1960s. And in terms of the people to people training, I just noticed that there's the one thing in the menu is the Tibet. Professor Justin also just mentioned that, and I think this my knowledge is that this initiative is actually from Uganda. I happened to contact one of the organizations to promote this trainings of Tibet, and it just signed contract with the Tibet colleges in Ethiopia, in Uganda, in many African countries. The initiative was based on the they recognize that since a lot of Chinese investment in Africa, in Ethiopia, and in Uganda, but what they see, particularly these SOEs, they see that's the shortage of skilled labors. So that why they think they have to start collaborations with the Tibet colleges at a local level, but also I last year I attended a conference at Beijing University, and one of the scholar, maybe you know that her, Zhou Yujun, she's looking at the Tibet trainings, and she sees the Tibet training as a response to the domestic politics, because she said is that it's a response to the president's initiative to address the unemployment of the youth, and also to win the support from the popularity. I don't know whether her argument is true. So I also see this people to people collaborations. In this case, the Tibet trainings is also like an effort for both parties to seek, to identify which domain that they can reach some collaborations. Yeah, but there are also like other types of people-to-people trainings. And one thing that I think is hasn't been done is that the Chinese, I have to admit, the Chinese are almost ignorant of the African cultures. They don't have this. And I don't know whether Africans know the Chinese culture a lot, but I believe you've been in Beijing for a long time, but there's still a limit to a small number of people that know that's what's in your mind. So I think this is really, really the FOCAC has to focus on, and yeah.
Thank you, Liang. Okay, so let's turn to Lema. Lema, I think you've been working on security development nexus in the China-Africa relations, and indeed this focus has highlighted peace and security cooperation between China and Africa as one of the key things. In light of, for instance, political instability in the Sahel, mentioned countries like Sudan, Niger, what the UN General Secretary lately called the cool belt. So what do you think would look like in terms of China relating with these countries How do you see China balancing its development goals with the rising security challenges across the African continent, for instance? Or, yeah, let's just focus on Africa. There are lots of wars, wars in Ukraine, wars in Asia, but how do you see China-Africa relations in the context of the current security and peace situation on the continent?
Thank you, Joel, for that generous introduction. But before I start, I would like to thank you and your team for putting this together. I also like to recognize Professor Johnston for her activeness in the network and her willingness to share the resources. That is really, really appreciated. Thank you to Dr. Liang, and very nice to meet you. So in terms of security aspect, again, going back to that broader picture Professor Johnston that presented in terms of how comprehensive FOCAC has become, like it's the document as well, and especially this year's. But on the narrow niche of security aspect, I think that leads us to China's global security initiative. And one thing is that what I found fascinating, beyond the action plan, and is also Xi Jinping's speech during the conference, whereby he really emphasized, again, in addition to other aspects of China-Africa relations, the security aspect. And just a brief, history to that for those who are not familiar with it. I think the security aspect in China-Africa relations started really following the Arab Spring, especially after what happened in Libya, where China had to evacuate its nationals and the loss that its company incurred. But then right after that, we also saw what happened in Mali and then in South Sudan. So all these really forced China to rethink the issue of security, because before that, China used to think that it was possible to do business without really getting involved into the security aspect of African countries, seeing that has a political aspect, and given the non-interference policy, it used to think that it should just do without getting involved into peace and security issues. But that reality forced a rethinking in that regard. So getting back to the global security initiative, I think there is also the sense of aligning those geo initiatives, as you mentioned earlier, into general aspect, not only with China, with Africa, within China-Africa relations, but also China's global engagement, including at the UN. But getting back to the speech by Xi Jinping during FOCAC, I think 6 key points could be noted before I get back to what those implications, like the implication of those points to with regard to the security and stability and political instability in the Sahel and the broader West African country, West African region. Now, for the Chinese president, for example, pledged for a partnership action for common security, again, which also aligns with the idea of common destiny or shared future, which people prefer. So the first point, through that, he promises, for the next 3 years to provide training to about 6,000 military personnel and 1,000 police and law enforcement officers. We know that these the part of police and law enforcement is also a growing aspect within FOCAC, document, but also like the broader engagement in China-Africa relations. which we can trace back to the previous two, the one in Senegal, and then before that due to COVID issues. But this year, again, there is a sense of deepening that aspect. The second point I could note is that the president also promises to invite about 600 young African military officers to visit China. I think that goes back to what Dr. Liang was just mentioning. There was that aspect, but also it's historical, but now it's now under the umbrella of FOCAC. It's not something new, but it's also important to note that putting it into FOCAC makes it more visible. The third point I would like to note, the president also promised to conduct joint military training exercises and patrol with African partners. The fourth, assist in mining clearance across Africa. We know that in many African countries, given the history of instability and conflict, that is a major issue. The second to last point I would like to mention is that there is also a promise to work with African partners to provide security for joint project, personnel, and property. I found this point fascinating because again, why security? Why that aspect in Africa relations? One thing is that it's a way of protecting Chinese investment, not just under the BRI, but also people-to-people connection, because we know that there are a lot of Chinese actors like private individuals and companies that are also present in many African countries. And the last point I would like to mention is that there is a promise to offer 1 million RMB in military assistance grant. Again, going back to emphasizing that aspect. Now, given the time limit we have seen, I would like to move on to the question of what that means in terms of political instability, security challenges in African countries, with a particular focus in the Sahel region. I think all these aspects shows us that again, forcing the rethinking of you can't do, and in his speech he did mention that you cannot promote development while